Welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephania Cox. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo attended the American Legion 101st National Convention in Indianapolis today, where he gave a speech themed around celebrating Americanism in our foreign policy.
Pompeo told a crowd of veterans that the U.S. isn't going to apologize for America anymore.
Some of our leaders would say that the idea of America or of Americanism means inherent racism or sexism.
He said some people equate Americanism with a narrow-minded nationalism and want the U.S. to reject its founding principles, bestowed by God and codified in the Constitution.
They want us to reject the very ideas that are central to understanding our nation's exceptionalism and indeed its greatness. That can't happen.
He reasoned that Americanism means standing up for the unalienable rights given by the Constitution, something he said is reflected in the actions of the Trump administration by calling out China, North Korea, and Iran's bad behavior. Pompeo also touched on Afghanistan and said that after an 18-year war, the time has come to move on. He stated that President Trump is committed to making sure we get it right.
We want to get our folks home as fast and in as large numbers as we can. And we want to make sure that never again is terror struck on the United States from that soil.
Tuesday was day 6 of the American Legion National Convention and also included the American Legion Distinguished Service Medal, accepted by Ohio Governor Mike DeWine on behalf of the late Senator John McCain.
The alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein got their day in court, although not under the circumstances they had hoped for. Epstein, a hedge fund manager accused of sex trafficking underage girls over several years, was found dead in his jail cell August 10th.
15 women who say they were sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein filed into a New York City court on Tuesday. While many said they wished he had been there to hear their stories, many were also glad to have the chance to talk about their trauma.
It was so powerful in there, hearing all the other victims and very similar stories that I have endured.
The judge could have dismissed Epstein's charges without holding a hearing, but he chose to hold it to, quote, ensure the victims in this case are treated fairly and with dignity.
I wanted to thank the judge for letting us speak, having some closure.
While the charges will most likely be dropped, any accomplices he had could still face justice.
Jeffrey Epstein's death, whether it was a suicide or murder, does not end the case.
Epstein's death was ruled a suicide by hanging by New York's chief medical examiner. However, questions remain about how he was able to hang himself and why he was taken off suicide watch.
And a former Google executive who went to work for Uber is accused of stealing trade secrets from Google. A United States attorney announced the charges today in San Francisco.
For trade secret theft, in violation of Title 18.
U.S. Attorney David Anderson announced that Anthony Scott Lewandowski is charged with stealing information on self-driving cars while working at Google.
Lewandowski was a high-ranking Google executive with a responsibility for a major engineering team within Google's self-driving car project called Project Chauffeur.
He worked on Google's self-driving car project from 2009 until he resigned in January 2016. Back then, he led the Light Detecting and Ranging, or LiDAR, engineering team. The project consisted of Google's custom plans for self-driving car technology. The former Google executive allegedly downloaded secure files about the project's engineering, manufacturing, and business information. This included instructions on installing and testing LiDAR technology.
These are the crown jewels of companies. These are heavily protected, confidential information, and accessible on a need-to-know basis.
At the time he took the files, Lewandowski was allegedly involved with 2 companies that were competitors of Google. If convicted, Lewandowski would face a maximum sentence of 10 years and a fine of $250,000 plus restitution. Eileen Ng, NTD News, San Francisco.
On the opioid crisis, a congressman is calling for reinforced security screenings at a major international airport to stop fentanyl from pouring into New York City. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on the harmful shipments from overseas.
Congressman Max Rose announced today that not enough is being done to stop fentanyl from being shipped into the United States, most of which he says comes from China.
And it's arriving via the post office. In the facility behind me, over 50% of international mail coming into the United States is screened.
Customs and Border Protection is responsible for processing international mail entering airports, but in a review of the John F. Kennedy Airport last year, it was found that the inspection process was inadequate, which could lead to serious oversights. The Inspector General gave recommendations to fix this, but so far, Rose said some of these improvements haven't been made yet.
These recommendations included actually inspecting all international mail that has been selected for inspection, bringing in more canine teams dedicated to this international mail facility, and improving technology and screening processes.
The U.S. Treasury stated in August that Chinese drug traffickers use the U.S. Postal Service the most, which Rose says is because of its weaker security screenings. President Trump addressed the crisis last Friday in a thread condemning China for imposing tariffs on American goods. Also, I am ordering all carriers, including FedEx, Amazon, UPS, and the Post Office, to search for and refuse all deliveries of fentanyl from China or anywhere else. Fentanyl kills 100,000 Americans a year. President Xi said this would stop. It didn't. Despite the shortcomings at JFK Airport, Rose is hopeful that the president will take action against Chinese pharmaceutical companies.
China has not done nearly enough yet. Not nearly enough. All right? And that's why we're responding, and it is my belief that the president will sign this legislation with sanctions on Chinese pharmaceutical companies that are producing this fentanyl.
The U.S. Treasury imposed sanctions on 3 Chinese men last Wednesday accused of trafficking fentanyl into the U.S. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Have you ever wondered how flight attendants and pilots fly through security screenings with ease? It's called the Known Crewmember program, and it allows TSA officers to verify the identity and employment status of airline crew members. But change is on the horizon.
The TSA is taking another look at the special screening program after having initially thought about scrapping it altogether. But instead of trashing the perk for flight crew, they're making it tougher for airline employees to get through security. Moving forward, pilots and flight attendants will have new officially mandated uniforms. Likewise, the TSA will likely step up random security measures to screen pilots and flight attendants even more. As of now, the agency is in the midst of an audit looking into possible vulnerabilities. It stated that nothing specific prompted the sudden change, only that there's been, quote, renewed focus on insider threats, unquote. Changes were announced Saturday and are set to kick off on Wednesday.
As tropical storm Dorian continues to travel up from the south, a hurricane watch has been posted for Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Florida is also in its path.
There is some good news. Tropical storm Dorian weakened early Tuesday morning as it passed through Barbados. The storm is expected to hit Puerto Rico Wednesday with more than 4 inches of rainfall and possibly high winds. The governor of Puerto Rico has declared a state of emergency and says the island is prepared. People in Puerto Rico are lining up for hours to get water and supplies ahead of Dorian. Video shows streets are flooded in Martinique due to Dorian, some spots receiving over 8 inches of rain. The current forecast calls for Dorian to reach Florida's southeastern coast in the early hours of Sunday morning. Reporting by Eleanor Cow, NTD News.
And in Toronto yesterday, a man suspected of vandalizing newspaper boxes belonging to the Epoch Times over a period of several months was arrested.
For months, over 70 newspaper boxes in Toronto belonging to the independent news organization have been the target of vandalism. The papers in the boxes were taken away in copious volumes. The boxes were damaged and garbage was smeared around inside the boxes. On Monday, Toronto police arrested a man who was observed removing large numbers of the newspapers from an Epoch Times box near Yonge Street and Finch Avenue. The man was arrested before he could vandalize the box. Detective Corey Jones was leading investigation.
This individual had attended this location on several previous occasions, and with the assistance of observation and surveillance that had been done by the publication themselves, in partnership with the police, we were able to identify an individual approaching the boxes. He subsequently was observed by police stealing the newspapers from the boxes.
Fabio Guerrieri has been charged with mischief over $5,000. He appeared before a judge on Monday and was released after taking an oath to not go near Epoch Times newspaper boxes. His next court appearance is on September 19th. The vandalism started in early April when the newspaper featured special coverage on China and its human rights abuses. Other Canadian cities, besides Toronto, also saw cases of vandalism like in Vancouver, where it intensified after Epoch Times' special coverage on China and Huawei. In Calgary, papers are constantly stolen from about a dozen boxes around the city. Recently, in New York's Queensboro, Epoch Times newspaper boxes have been vandalized, with the newspapers inside one of them even being set ablaze. Earlier this year, also in New York, a man was arrested and charged with threatening a woman after she tried to stop him from throwing away papers that he took from an Epoch Times box. NTD Television is a part of Epoch Media Group, which also owns the Epoch Times newspaper. Reporting by Eric Rusek, NTD News, Toronto.
In foreign affairs today, National Security Advisor John Bolton visited Kiev. He paid respect to Ukrainian servicemen killed in the eastern conflict against pro-Russian separatists.
The people of the United States fought for their independence, their sovereignty. We understand what that kind of struggle means, and the people of the United States are with the people of Ukraine. Again, it's an honor for me and Ambassador Taylor to be here today.
Earlier on Tuesday, Bolton said that he had traveled to Kiev to hear the priorities of the new government following the election of President Volodymyr Zelensky. Bolton told reporters that Zelensky and Trump could meet soon in Poland, but he did not give a date. Bolton added that it was in the United States' interest to see a successful Ukraine. And on national security, experts analyze which country or region in Asia is most likely to host missiles for the U.S. after Defense Secretary Mark Esper said he wants to deploy land-based intermediate-range missiles there as soon as possible.
The U.S. officially withdrew from its arms control treaty with Russia, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, on August 2nd. The U.S. soon expressed that it would deploy land-based intermediate-range missiles in Asia as soon as possible. It is generally believed that the most likely place to deploy the new missile is one of the U.S.'s military bases in Guam. As for U.S. allies, CSIS expert Bonnie Glazer says the most likely host is Japan.
Increasing the commitment of the United States is welcome for Japan. But at the same time, Japan has a principle, non-nuclear weapon principle. So Japan need to change this principle if US deploy nuclear force in Japan.
It is not easy to persuade most Japanese to abandon this non-nuclear principle. However, some experts believe that the military threat China poses is forcing Japan to rethink this policy. Another issue is whether U.S. missiles will be deployed directly to Taiwan. Experts say it's not likely because it seems too provocative to China. Taiwan is more likely to establish its own missile system and cooperate with allies to create a new system of deterrence.
Yes, so I think in the specific case of Taiwan, the U.S. could work with its other allies in the region to be able to deploy systems like these missiles, but other air, sea, and ground systems to be able to, even from bases in the Marianas or Japan, Korea, the Philippines, be able to bring forces and help the Taiwanese if the Taiwanese come under a communist Chinese invasion.
Some experts say that the deployment of U.S. missiles to the Asia-Pacific region will be a long-term process, and the discussion has just begun. At the same time, this is also an effective way to pressure China, forcing it to consider joining a new missile constraint framework.
And I think the Secretary was right to at least raise the issue, put it on the agenda. It's not a bad thing for Beijing to know we have options that they may not like, and therefore the option right now is maybe to join us in dialogue, in negotiation, rather than to let us go down this path.
Reporting by Kitty Wong, NTD News.
Speaking of Asia, Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam dismissed protesters' 5 demands today. This after escalating violence over the weekend. She said the government has the situation under control. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg is in Hong Kong and has more on the tense situation between the government and its citizens.
Police fired water cannons for the first time against protesters Sunday. An officer also fired a warning shot from a gun with real bullets on Sunday night. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam spoke with the press today for the first time since demonstrations escalated over the weekend.
It is not a question of not responding. It is a question of not accepting those demands.
Fight for freedom! Stand with Hong Kong!
The protesters are asking that a controversial extradition bill be removed, for authorities to stop labeling protesters as rioters, an investigation into police brutality for those that have been arrested to be released, and greater democratic freedoms. Lam said the Hong Kong government has not lost control and that she will not step down.
I think a responsible chief executive at this point in time should continue to hold the fort and do her utmost to restore law and order in Hong Kong.
Citizens of Hong Kong have become restless with the current situation and level of police violence used to dispel protests. Citizens are wary of giving their full name.
It's because it doesn't meet the requirement of those youngsters. She has to be frankly and sincerely talk.
So we need to fight with the Hong Kong citizen because they don't care about our opinion. So she said she only to take down all the protesters. So it's basically a war between the government and the citizen.
But I think the government should do more to resolve this matter, but not just blaming the protester.
The Beijing-backed leader said Hong Kong's government could handle the unrest by itself, and she will not give up dialogue with protesters.
From those I personally have had contact with, I know of at least 10 victims of police violence after arrest. 6 suicide victims, and 3 ruptured eyeballs later. All we have won are Carrie Lam's offers to participate in an insincere platform for dialogue.
The statements from Lam come at a time when protesters are growing more agitated over the lack of government response after nearly 3 months of protests.
I don't feel surprised because she has made similar comments in the past, and she appears quite robust and persistent on her stance. Yeah, so it doesn't surprise me at all.
Just last before, there's no big difference from her speech. So actually, no surprise.
While this is the first time that Chief Executive Carrie Lam has said the government does not accept the 5 demands, it likely does not come as a surprise to most, as there has been little to no response until now. Protesters are determined to continue their demonstrations, with a couple of rallies planned for tomorrow and a large protest planned for Saturday. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News, Hong Kong.
And in Israel, petitioners are calling attention to forced organ removal in China. Researchers who have investigated the claims say the Chinese Communist Party uses the practice to silence and make money off of prisoners of conscience. They say the main group being targeted are practitioners of Falun Gong, a meditation and Qigong practice.
Actually, it's a crime against humanity. That's the whole point. So I thought I should join this petition in order to act against this ongoing criminal activity. Professor Maisel is one of 150 professors and one of 500 Israelis who have signed the petition. It calls on the country's leaders to speak out about organ harvesting, as well as other human rights abuses in China.
When I received the petition via email, it was right away very clear to me that I would sign it. I really wanted to create an outcry, raise my voice. It's unacceptable that these things are taking place. I wish I could do more than just sign, but it's the very least that every human being with a basic sense of morality ought to do.
In addition to forced organ removal, the petition calls attention to the severe mental and physical abuse of Falun Gong practitioners. This includes forcing them to do hard labor and depriving them of basic necessities. It asks the Chinese Communist Party to end medical experiments on Falun Gong practitioners and end the sexual abuse of women, including minors. Yuval Cherlo is one of 50 rabbis who have signed the petition.
Is that everyone was created in God's image. This is the reason why we cannot sit silent when something bad is happening somewhere and want to be part of the combat against it in order to let people do everything they want according to their freedom of choice and not because of anybody forcing them.
The organizers of the petition say they received confirmation it has been sent to Israel's president and the head of parliament.
And speaking of China, as the UK prepares to exit the EU, its trading relationship with China is becoming more pertinent. But trading with China doesn't mean kowtowing to them. Jane Werrell in London reports.
The term golden era is a mantra often repeated by both the UK and China to describe their relationship. But Charles Parton, who was Specialist Advisor on China to the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, says that perhaps it's more about finding a golden mean rather than a so-called golden era.
There has to be a balance between, on the one hand, our national security, our interests and our values, and doing business with China.
Contrary to the line of the Chinese ambassador to the UK, not kowtowing to China has historically resulted in trade going up.
When the UK was in the doghouse over David Cameron meeting the Dalai Lama back in 2010, in the 2 subsequent years, yes, we had no ministerial visits, but our trade went up. I always say to people, look at the facts. China needs foreign trading partners as much as we need China.
And bringing in too much money from China may not necessarily benefit the UK.
The spreading of Huawei communication network is beginning to undermine the national security a little bit, and admitting too much Chinese hot money would just make property prices in central London go up and up. It would hardly benefit the common well-being of the British people.
But a former ambassador says that the British government does continue to bring up the Communist Party's poor human rights record with China in private, if not in public.
The British media were constantly saying, you must speak to the Chinese government about their behaviour on human rights. And British ministers did that, but they did it in a way that was not in public, and I'm sure that continues to be the case.
Recent protests in London highlighting the political turmoil in Hong Kong have put the spotlight on British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Will Boris surrender to China? One of the banners boldly reads. The answer remains to be seen. Jane Werrell, NTD News.
In a battle with nature, Bolivia's government is working to combat raging wildfires and is calling for international aid.
The fires are burning unabated across the Otuquis Nature Reserve, located in southeastern Bolivia's border with Paraguay and Brazil. Dramatic aerials show burnt areas. At least 1 million hectares, or approximately 3,800 square miles, have been impacted by the fires. Late last week, Bolivia contracted a Boeing 747 supertanker from the U.S. to help with the firefighting and has mobilized more than 2,000 firefighters, as well as small aircraft and helicopters. But the area affected by wildfire has nonetheless nearly doubled since last Thursday. Bolivian President Evo Morales says he's open to international aid to fight the blazes and suspended his presidential campaign to help coordinate foreign aid efforts. Reporting by Eleanor Tao, NTD News.
During the 6th NTD International Chinese Traditional Martial Arts Competition, 3 gold winners were chosen from 39 finalists. We met with one of them who said he almost didn't participate because he feared failure. NTD reporter Sherwin Rong has more about how he got his confidence back.
Taiyan Liu participated in the International Traditional Chinese Martial Arts Competition first in Taiwan with a wish to revive ancient martial arts. However, he never thought he would make it this far.
As the spear is really heavy, I'm kind of afraid. But I feel this fear is distracting me from focusing on what I really want to do. Before I got on the stage, I was just thinking I will try to do it well, to put my heart into presenting this traditional style of martial art.
Taiyan has been practicing the pear blossom spear style for more than 13 years. His teacher's attitude attracted him.
I used to be someone who likes showing off, but then I saw my teacher, who had great skill but also kept a low profile.
Even though the training is hard, he understands that martial arts is not just a skill, but a way of improving the mind and spirit.
You really need to train this spirit of martial virtue into your very bones. So it is not that when you are on stage, you are a martial artist, but off stage as well. Traditional martial arts is about martial virtue. When you don't have this virtue, you might hurt people if you have great skills.
For Tai Yan, it isn't about winning. While he's happy to get gold, he's also grateful to the judges who put their hearts into preserving this ancient art. Reporting by Shi Wen-rong, NTD News.
In other sport news, the Swiss Epoch, one of the most difficult mountain biking races, concluded after 5 grueling days.
Spanning 215 miles of spectacular terrain through the Swiss Alps, the annual stage race including almost 40,000 feet of climbing through the Graubünden region. For the final stage in Davos, competitors biked 40 miles, featuring up to nearly 8,000 feet of climbing through the picturesque hills of Lenzerheide. Italian duo Casagrande and Ruben Steiner secured the men's title, while Germany's Adelheid Morath and Bettina Janis won 4 of the 5 stages to clinch overall victory on the women's side.
And that's all for today's NTD News. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.